14 August 1942. North Atlantic skies southwest of Iceland. A vast sheet of gray ocean stretched below a ceiling of dull cloud, broken only by wind-whipped whitecaps. Second Lieutenant Ayla Shahan sat inside the tight cockpit of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, adjusting his oxygen mask while peering through the aircraft's distinctive twin-boom structure. Off his wing flew Major John Weltman in another Lightning. Their patrol had been uneventful for hours, just sea, sky, and the steady vibration of twin Allison engines. The monotony ended when a dark silhouette appeared low on the horizon. As it grew larger, the shape resolved into a four-engine German maritime patrol bomber, a Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, returning from operations against Allied shipping. A British patrol aircraft had already detected the bomber and transmitted its position. Lieutenant Joseph Schaefer, flying a Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, made the first attack, scoring hits that left one of the bomber's engines trailing smoke. Shahan and Weltman advanced their throttles. The twin-engine fighters surged forward, their combined power allowing them to close quickly. Once in range, they fired. Each Lightning's nose-mounted armament, heavy machine guns and a cannon aligned along the center line, concentrated fire with unusual precision. Flames erupted along the Condor's fuselage, and the large aircraft fell into the Atlantic. After confirming the destruction, the American pilots turned back toward Iceland. The action marked one of the earliest Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed by U.S. Army Air Forces fighters, and the Lightning's performance would soon alter German perceptions of twin-engine fighters. Landing gear seemed to contradict established principles of fighter design. At the time, experienced commanders such as Adolf Galland reviewed these reports. German doctrine favored single-engine fighters for agility in close combat. Previous experience with heavy twin-engine aircraft, especially the Messerschmitt Bf 110, had reinforced the belief that larger fighters were vulnerable in dogfights. On paper, the American aircraft appeared even heavier and more complex. Many pilots assumed it would be suitable mainly for long-range patrol or reconnaissance. Combat soon disproved that assumption. 19 November 1942, over Tunisia. At sunrise, formations of Lightnings from U.S. fighter groups escorted Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers toward targets in North Africa. German fighters of Jagdschwader 53, flying Messerschmitt Bf 109 aircraft, climbed to intercept from above and behind standard tactics against heavier opponents. Veteran pilots expected the twin-engine Americans to be slow to react. Instead, the P-38 seconds turned sharply into the attack. Their maneuverability surprised the German pilots. Despite their size, the Lightnings tightened their turns and brought nose-mounted weapons to bear quickly. Because all guns were aligned along the center line rather than spread across the wings, their fire remained concentrated at varying distances, making even brief bursts dangerous. Several German pilots were lost in the encounter. Survivors adapted over time, developing methods to counter the Lightning's strengths, but early encounters forced a reassessment. The aircraft's speed, range, and concentrated firepower made it a formidable opponent when used properly. Some Luftwaffe pilots would eventually specialize in combating the P-38, learning its vulnerabilities while respecting its capabilities. Post-war reflections from German veterans often emphasized a key lesson from these early engagements. Assumptions based on familiar aircraft types could be misleading. The initial dismissal of the Lightning stemmed largely from prior experience with heavier twin-engine fighters, yet the American design demonstrated that with sufficient power, aerodynamic efficiency, and centralized armament, a twin-engine fighter could be highly effective in aerial combat. In the late 1930s, Germany developed the Messerschmitt Bf 110 as a long-range, twin-engine heavy fighter intended to escort bombers and break up enemy bomber formations. It carried formidable armament for its time, 4 20mm cannons, and 4 machine guns concentrated in the nose, along with defensive rear-facing guns. On paper, it seemed powerful and versatile. In practice, its performance during the 1940 Battle of Britain revealed serious weaknesses. British Spitfires and Hurricanes proved faster and more maneuverable, and the large twin-engine fighter struggled to defend itself in turning combat. It could neither outfight single-engine interceptors nor reliably outrun them, leading to severe losses. By the end of that year, the Bf-110 was pulled from daytime operations over Britain and reassigned to night fighting and ground attack duties. From this experience, a doctrine took hold within the Luftwaffe. Twin-engine fighters were inherently vulnerable in air-to-air combat. Subsequent encounters seemed to reinforce that view. Similar aircraft from other nations had also performed poorly when used as day fighters. As a result, when American P-38 Lightnings began appearing, German pilots initially assumed they were facing another flawed heavy fighter. Senior commanders shared that expectation. Post-war accounts by General Adolf Galland indicate that early comparisons between the P-38 and the Bf-110 led German intelligence to predict similar shortcomings. That assumption turned out to be a costly misjudgment. When U.S. Army Air Corps officers Benjamin Kelsey and Gordon Saville drafted an ambitious requirement for a high-performance twin-engine interceptor. Their proposal demanded unprecedented performance, a top speed around 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, a ceiling near 36,000 feet, and substantial endurance at high speed. Existing fighters could not meet these goals, but the specification called for a completely new approach. Several companies submitted designs, all confronting the same challenge. A single engine lacked the power required, yet 2 engines usually meant excessive weight and drag. At Lockheed, engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson led a team that embraced the twin-engine concept rather than trying to imitate single-engine handling. After evaluating multiple layouts, Johnson proposed an unconventional arrangement. 2 engines would be mounted in slim booms extending from the wings. Between them, a central nacelle would house the pilot and concentrated nose-mounted weapons. Twin tail surfaces attached to the booms would provide strong stability and control. This configuration offered multiple advantages. Counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque effects. The centralized armament required no convergence adjustments, and the streamlined booms reduced aerodynamic drag compared with more traditional layouts. The Army Air Corps approved the concept in June 1937 and ordered a prototype designated XP-38. Built at Lockheed's Burbank facility, the aircraft first flew in January 1939 with Lieutenant Kelsey at the controls. Test flights demonstrated impressive performance. The counter-rotating propellers improved handling, the tricycle landing gear enhanced visibility on the ground, and the cockpit's position between the engines provided excellent forward and side views. To showcase its capabilities, Kelsey attempted a transcontinental speed record flight across the United States in February 1939. He completed the journey in just over 7 hours with refueling stops, setting a new record. However, during the final approach, engine power was lost due to carburetor icing, and the aircraft crashed short of the runway. Although the prototype was destroyed, Kelsey survived without serious injury. Rather than halting the program, the incident reinforced confidence in the design. The central nacelle remained largely intact despite severe damage to the engine booms, demonstrating structural resilience. The Army Air Corps ordered additional evaluation aircraft, and by the time production models entered service in 1942, many early problems had been resolved. Improvements included self-sealing fuel tanks, pilot armor, refined aerodynamics, and better turbo superchargers. Lockheed test pilots also developed tactics suited to the aircraft's strengths. Unlike single-engine fighters that relied on tight turns, the P-38 excelled at high-speed passes, climbing maneuvers, and diving attacks. Its twin engines provided strong acceleration and vertical performance, enabling combat techniques unavailable to most contemporaries. German pilots encountering the Lightning for the first time expected a heavy fighter with familiar weaknesses. Instead, they faced a machine capable of surprising agility and speed. In North Africa, early engagements quickly revealed that standard methods for dealing with twin-engine aircraft were ineffective. Properly flown, the P-38 could compete with or outperform German fighters in several regimes. Its concentrated nose armament delivered powerful, accurate bursts that could inflict severe damage in seconds. Fighters were inherently inferior in air combat, proved overly simplistic. The P-38's development showed how engineering innovation and tailored tactics could overcome the limitations that had doomed earlier aircraft of similar configuration. He later reflected on the encounter with striking honesty. The P-38 could shift from steady flight into a sharp climb with very little warning, and its nose-mounted weapons made any frontal exchange extremely dangerous. Several German pilots were lost after attempting an attack and then pulling up too late. The American fighter would simply raise its nose and fire, often destroying them in the climb. From that point forward, one principle became absolute: never engage a Lightning head-on. German pilots began developing methods to survive these meetings. One approach associated with Stigler involved snapping the Bf-109 into a quick roll and diving away, taking advantage of the P-38's relatively slow initial roll response. Even so, success depended on precise timing. If the American pilot predicted the move, he could pitch upward and fire into the diving aircraft from an advantageous angle. Among those with extensive experience against the Lightning was Johannes Steinhoff, commander of Jagdgeschwader 77 in North Africa. His evaluation was more balanced than early German opinions, but no less revealing. He admitted that the Bf-109 might hold a slight speed advantage in level flight. However, he emphasized that turning combat with the twin-engine fighter was intimidating because the P-38 could maneuver in tighter circles than expected. Any mistake by a German pilot could quickly place the Lightning on his tail. On August 25, 1943, Steinhoff witnessed the aircraft's capabilities firsthand. Standard procedure would have been to avoid contact, but the two German pilots instead turned toward the formation and attacked from the front. Steinhoff's opening burst hit one Lightning's engine, forcing the American pilot to bail out and land on the runway below. He then damaged a second aircraft before breaking away. That evening, Steinhoff invited the captured American pilot, Lieutenant Williams, to share food and wine. According to U.S. records, their conversation included a frank discussion of tactics. Williams explained that the Lightning's true advantage was not simply speed or armament but flexibility. Its twin-engine design, initially assumed by German pilots to be a weakness, proved highly beneficial. If one engine failed, the pilot could shut it down, feather the propeller, and continue flying. This redundancy was especially valuable over the long distances of the Pacific and Mediterranean theaters. A single-engine fighter with damage usually meant an immediate forced landing or bailout. A Lightning could often return home on one engine after traveling hundreds of miles. The two engines also provided strong vertical performance. When pursued, a P-38 could climb steeply while maintaining airspeed. A single-engine opponent attempting to follow risked stalling first, leaving him exposed to a counterattack from above. Perhaps most significant, the configuration allowed the aircraft to carry far more fuel than most fighters. With external tanks, Lightnings regularly flew missions lasting 8 to 10 hours and covering distances exceeding 1,200 miles. This extended range reshaped air operations in the Pacific and enabled missions that would otherwise have been impossible. A famous example occurred on April 18, 1943. At Pearl Harbor, American codebreakers intercepted a Japanese message revealing that Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy and planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, would be traveling by air from Rabaul to Bougainville. The route placed his transport aircraft over hundreds of miles of ocean well beyond the reach of most Allied fighters. Only the P-38 had sufficient range to attempt an interception. Major John Mitchell organized the mission with careful calculations. 18 P-38 seconds from the 347th Fighter Group departed Guadalcanal, flying at very low altitude to avoid detection and maintaining radio silence throughout the journey. At the planned interception point, a small group would attack Yamamoto's aircraft while the rest provided cover against Japanese escorts. On the morning of April 18, the formation lifted off and flew just above the ocean surface for nearly 2 hours, navigating across vast stretches of open water. At the predicted time, they sighted 2 Japanese bombers with fighter escorts. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber broke away to engage. Barber closed in on Yamamoto's transport and fired a short but decisive burst that crippled the aircraft, which crashed into the jungle below, killing all on board. The operation succeeded largely because the P-38 possessed the range, endurance, and reliability required to fly nearly 900 miles over open sea, engage in combat, and return safely. No other American fighter at the time could have carried out such a mission. German analysts later recognized with concern that the United States fielded a fighter whose reach rivaled or exceeded that of many bombers. Even so, many Luftwaffe pilots continued to underestimate the Lightning throughout 1943, often with costly consequences. On 5 April 1943, 26 P-38 fighters from the 82nd Fighter Group clashed with German and Italian aircraft over North Africa. American pilots reported destroying 31 opposing planes while suffering only light losses. Afterward, captured German airmen supposedly referred to the twin-boom fighter as the fork-tailed devil, a nickname later embraced by American crews as proof of the aircraft's reputation. Yet historians have found little evidence that German combat records from the time actually used that phrase, suggesting it may have been encouraged by U.S. propaganda rather than enemy testimony. What is clear is that Luftwaffe pilots came to respect the aircraft's capabilities, regardless of what they called it. One German ace who studied the P-38 closely was Franz Schieß, who later became the Luftwaffe's most successful opponent of the type. He claimed his first Lightning over the sea south of Sicily on 21 May 1943, marking his 50th victory. By then he had developed tactics designed to exploit weaknesses in the early P-38. The aircraft's roll response was sluggish in its initial movement, allowing a defending German pilot to snap into a tight turn before the American fighter could react. In head-on situations, the recommended escape was to brake sharply and dive away, using superior diving speed to open distance. Despite these vulnerabilities, Schieß also recorded the P-38's strengths. At low altitude it could outpace his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6 in level flight and often climbed better below about 20,000 feet. Its concentrated nose-mounted guns were extremely destructive, and its twin-engine layout made it unusually resilient to rear aspect damage. On 2 September 1943 he led a scramble against U.S. B-25 bombers attacking rail yards near Naples. During the ensuing engagement with their Lightning escort, German pilots claimed 10 P-38 seconds destroyed. Schieß himself, however, did not return. His Bf 109 G6 went down in the Mediterranean southwest of Ischia. He was only 22. Credited with 67 victories from 657 missions, 17 of them against P-38 seconds. Ironically, the aircraft he had studied so carefully ultimately brought about his own loss. Another experienced pilot, Kurt Buligen, later described mixed results when facing Lightnings in Africa. He recalled an encounter in which 6 German fighters met 8 P-38 seconds and claimed 7 victories, noting that both the P-38 and the B-24 bomber could burn easily when hit. Yet he also admitted that success often depended on pilot experience. Against seasoned American crews who understood the Lightning's strengths, German pilots found it a far more dangerous opponent. By late 1943, German intelligence units had assembled detailed guidance on how to engage the P-38 effectively. Pilots were advised to attack from above and behind, avoid head-on passes because of the aircraft's powerful forward-firing guns, and stay out of low-altitude turning fights where its power-to-weight ratio gave it an edge. If trapped in a turn, the recommended response was to snap roll and dive away, exploiting the Bf-109's superior dive performance. They also learned not to underestimate the twin-engine fighter simply because of its configuration. That assumption had already proven costly. As these tactics spread, newer versions of the Lightning began reaching combat units. The P-38J, introduced in August 1943, brought major improvements. Hydraulically assisted ailerons greatly increased roll responsiveness, eliminating the sluggishness German pilots had previously exploited. Dive flaps allowed the aircraft to maintain control in steep, high-speed descents, enabling American pilots to follow opponents into dives that earlier models could not safely match. Later P-38J variants also addressed a long-standing problem: the bitterly cold cockpit experience during high-altitude missions over Europe. Because the cockpit sat between the engines rather than behind them, heat had to be ducted from the wing-mounted power plants and was often insufficient. Pilots flying at 26,000 feet over Germany sometimes returned with numb hands and feet, and in extreme cases mild frostbite. Improved heating systems in later models solved much of this issue, making the Lightning more effective in the demanding conditions of the European theater. German pilots reached similar conclusions. The P-38's greatest strength was not any single attribute, speed, armament, or maneuverability, but the way its combined capabilities allowed its pilot to control the terms of battle. The twin-engine configuration, once seen as a liability, ultimately provided flexibility and survivability. By late 1944, as Allied forces advanced toward Germany from both east and west, German fighter units faced overwhelming pressure. Bomber formations appeared daily over German cities, escorted by large numbers of Allied fighters. P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s filled the skies, challenging the Luftwaffe across all fronts. Lightning units also flew numerous ground attack missions, striking transportation networks with bombs and strafing runs. The aircraft's distinctive twin-boom silhouette became a familiar sign of American air power. German pilots who had first encountered the P-38 in 1943 learned to respect it. Some reported that it outpaced and outclimbed their aircraft under certain conditions, especially when German fighters carried additional underwing armament that reduced performance. Even those who shot down Lightnings acknowledged its strengths. Still, its combat record was mixed. In the Mediterranean, where losses were highest, the P-38 often flew close escort for bombers and became vulnerable to German fighters attacking from above with positional advantage. Several engagements in late summer 1943 saw heavy Lightning losses during such missions, illustrating how tactics and circumstances could shape outcomes as much as aircraft design. Although this particular clash cost the Germans 4 Bf-109 fighters, it did not change the broader pattern of early encounters. In late 1943, and allowed Lightning pilots to maneuver freely and attack aggressively, outcomes improved markedly. Across all theaters, P-38 units eventually reported roughly 1,900 enemy aircraft destroyed. Total losses of the Lightning reached about 1,300 from every cause, combat, accidents, and ground fire included. While this record did not equal the later statistics of the P-51 Mustang, it still disproved the early German belief that the twin-engine fighter would be an easy target. The Lightning's combat record forced a reconsideration of long-held assumptions about twin-engine fighters. Before its arrival, many designers believed that having two engines automatically meant poorer agility in aerial combat. The P-38 demonstrated that when properly engineered, a twin-engine layout could offer decisive advantages. Post-war studies by both American and German aviation specialists pointed to several reasons for the aircraft's effectiveness. Its distinctive twin-boom configuration reduced aerodynamic drag and balanced weight efficiently. Traditional twin-engine fighters often suffered from interference drag and uneven thrust, but the Lightning's streamlined engine nacelles and counter-rotating propellers mitigated these problems. Its weapon system was another strength. All guns were mounted in the nose, concentrating firepower and eliminating the need for synchronization with propellers or convergence of wing-mounted weapons. Pilots trained on single-engine aircraft could transition without excessive difficulty, even if mastering its full capabilities required experience. German engineers examined captured examples carefully, hoping to replicate its success. By the time they understood the design's strengths, however, Germany lacked the resources to field an effective counterpart. The jet-powered Me-262 incorporated some similar lessons, but appeared too late and in insufficient numbers to influence the war's outcome. German perceptions of the P-38 shifted over time. Initial dismissal gave way to respect as American pilots learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths. By the end of the war, German fighter veterans acknowledged that defeating a well-flown Lightning required skill, favorable positioning, and experience. Against seasoned opponents, it was a formidable adversary. This change in attitude mirrored a broader realization about American air power. U.S. forces were not producing inferior machines flown by untrained crews. They were building aircraft tailored for specific roles and training pilots to maximize every advantage. The P-38 was not intended to outturn German fighters like the Bf-109 or Fw-190. Instead, it was designed to travel farther, climb higher, deliver heavier fire, and survive damage that would destroy single-engine rivals. Within those parameters, it excelled. By May 1945, the Lightning had largely been replaced in European frontline service by the P-51 Mustang. In the Pacific, however, it continued flying combat missions until Japan's surrender. In total, 10,037 P-38 seconds were built. They were credited with about 1,900 aerial victories, flew extensive reconnaissance operations deep into hostile territory, and conducted long-range strikes unreachable by other fighters. The aircraft also carried out the mission that resulted in the death of Admiral Yamamoto. Several of America's leading aces flew the P-38 exclusively. Richard Bong, the highest-scoring U.S. fighter pilot, achieved all his victories in the type. Thomas McGuire, second on the list, did the same. In the Pacific, Charles MacDonald scored 27 victories in his Lightning, demonstrating the aircraft's lethality in skilled hands. After the war, German veterans who encountered preserved P-38 seconds at museums and air shows often expressed respect for the design. One former ace who had once warned pilots never to attack a Lightning head-on spent nearly an hour studying a museum example in Ohio during the 1,980 seconds. He later described it as one of the most innovative fighter designs of the conflict and admitted that German engineers had been too conservative in comparison. Another German ace, who had shot down several P-38 seconds in a single engagement over Italy, later called it the most dangerous Allied fighter he had faced. This judgment surprised many, given his experience against Spitfires, Mustangs, and Soviet aircraft. He explained that while other fighters might defeat you in a turning fight, the Lightning's range, heavy armament, and resilience made it uniquely threatening. It could appear unexpectedly, strike from a distance, absorb return fire, and withdraw ready to fight again. The aircraft's flexibility made it a more formidable opponent than many single-engine fighters that excelled only in isolated performance metrics. German fighter pilots eventually realized that the American machine's strength lay not in dominating any single category, but in combining several capabilities into one platform. The conclusions they drew about the P-38 extended beyond aviation technology. Early in the war, many German airmen believed American engineering and combat doctrine would mirror established European practices. When U.S. designers introduced the twin-boom configuration of the Lightning, it was initially written off as an impractical experiment. Combat soon corrected that assumption. American planners were not bound by tradition. They were willing to adopt unconventional concepts if those concepts delivered operational advantages. This openness to experimentation, building aircraft tailored to particular missions rather than following accepted formulas, became a defining feature of American air power throughout the Second World War. The P-38 represented one of the clearest examples. By the time German pilots fully understood its significance, Allied forces had secured dominance in the air. Over Germany, American and British aircraft operated with increasing freedom, while the Luftwaffe struggled with mounting losses and severe fuel shortages. The same twin-engine fighter once mocked in briefings was now attacking transport routes and infrastructure with little resistance. Ultimately, the Lightning fulfilled its designer's goals. It gave the United States Army Air Forces a fighter capable of tasks beyond the reach of most single-engine aircraft. Its unusual configuration, which had invited ridicule at first glance, proved not misguided but transformative. The dual engines, initially viewed as a liability, offered redundancy, extended range, heavier armament, and greater survivability. These qualities reshaped aerial tactics and were learned by German aces through repeated, costly encounters. For Luftwaffe pilots flying in 1942 and 1943, the P-38 delivered a harsh lesson. Assumptions about an enemy's equipment can be dangerous. The twin-boom fighter, which contradicted German design doctrine, demonstrated lethal effectiveness in the hands of skilled American crews, addressing operational challenges in ways that departed from convention. German pilots who once laughed at reconnaissance photos of the unfamiliar shape later devised specialized tactics to counter it, acknowledging its strengths while seeking to exploit its vulnerabilities. Survivors of the Luftwaffe later reflected on their encounters with the Lightning. Veterans such as Franz Schieß and Johannes Steinhoff described a shift in perception from skepticism to respect in memoirs and interviews after the war. Their accounts consistently show how direct experience forced them to reconsider their expectations about twin-engine fighters. Beyond its victory totals, the P-38 demonstrated that unconventional designs could succeed when their advantages were fully exploited. The lesson carried forward into post-war aviation. Later, twin-engine fighters adopted principles the Lightning had proven in combat. Range, firepower, durability, and operational flexibility often outweighed adherence to traditional single-engine layouts. German pilots who underestimated the P-38 discovered this reality through combat against an opponent determined to use every strength its aircraft possessed. The distinctive outline that once seemed so unusual eventually signaled a new direction for fighter design. Over several years of conflict, from the North Atlantic to the Pacific, the aircraft's presence underscored a broader message. Innovation, not tradition, often determines the outcome of war.